see the emotion outpouring from Deshaun Watson.
I'm sending up my prayers. I already prayed for his leg, and I will continue.
This is without a doubt one of the most bittersweet videos I've ever made, and I know what fans are going to be thinking.
Mike, you said you were only going to make 1 to 2 Deshaun Watson videos a month.
But it seems like this might be my final Deshaun Watson video ever, because Deshaun Watson's career might be over. So before we get to the content, we are on the grind to 1 million subscribers. We're less than 40,000 subscribers away from reaching that goal. So if you guys want to help us get there, make sure you subscribe and turn on our notifications. And now that we got all that out of the way, work! We made $500 on Prize Picks this past Sunday, and fortunately, a lot of you guys tailed my picks on Instagram and Snapchat, and you guys let me know in my DMs. One of you even made $1,000 from my picks. Prize Picks is giving us another free square, meaning we only need to get 1 pick correct in order to 3x our money. All Anthony Edwards needs to do on opening night is score 1 point. Fortunately, we've been on a crazy streak, and if you haven't played Prize Picks, download the app or click in the link in the description down below and use my promo code Mikerophone to get $100 when you make an entry of $5 or more. Then follow me on Instagram at @TheFlightMike or on Snapchat to get my picks for free. And thank you, Prize Picks, for the sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Whenever I think of Deshaun Watson, the one word that comes to my head is conflict. And it's not only conflict in regards to Deshaun Watson's career, but it's also in regards to how my feelings are for Deshaun Watson the player and Deshaun Watson the person. On one hand, this guy was one of my favorite football players ever. I mean, his entire career at Clemson was absolutely magical. A part of me wanted Deshaun Watson to get drafted to the San Francisco 49ers because I felt like he would have been a perfect fit in Kyle Shanahan's offense in the 2017 NFL draft. Watson would fall all the way to the Houston Texans, and he would show immediately that he will one day be the future face of the NFL. And I know that sounds crazy to hear right now, but if you go all the way back to Deshaun Watson's rookie season, this is a guy that threw 19 touchdown passes in 6 games. It's something that we've never seen before. He was so good in those 6 games that he finished top 3 in Offensive Rookie of the Year voting. Can you just think of how insane that is? Watson looked like the next prototypical dual threat quarterback in his rookie season with the Texans before tearing his ACL. And in the very next year, he would back that up. In his first full season under center, Deshaun Watson threw for over 4,000 passing yards, completed 68% of his passes, made it to the Pro Bowl, was sacked a league-high 62 times, led the Houston Texans to a playoff berth, and once again cemented himself in the NFL as a future face of the league. Deshaun Watson's entire career with the Houston Texans was incredible, and I'm not going to go too much into detail about it because we did that in our previous video on him, but I think it's important to discuss how good of a football player Deshaun Watson truly was when he was on the Houston Texans, because it makes this whole situation that much more bizarre and that much more sad. I mean, in 2019, the Houston Texans would face off against the Buffalo Bills in the wild card round. The Texans were down 16-0 in the game before Deshaun Watson rallied the team to a 22-19 victory. He did this despite being sacked 7 times versus the Buffalo Bills. And the way he won the game was magical, spinning out of a potential 8th sack by 2 Bills defenders before he found Taiwan Jones, who was able to set up the game-winning field goal versus Buffalo. This was set up a matchup between 2 players that were considered to be the future faces of the NFL, the Kansas City Chiefs and the Houston Texans. And although Deshaun Watson threw for 388 yards and 2 touchdowns and rushed for 37 yards and a touchdown versus the Kansas City Chiefs, you could say that his defense let him down in this game, blowing a 24-0 lead and eventually losing 51-31. But it didn't matter at this point. Deshaun Watson clearly was the face of the Houston Texans moving forward, but little did Deshaun Watson know that this would be the pinnacle of his career. In 2020, Deshaun Watson would sign a 4-year, $177.5 million contract extension with $111 million guaranteed with the Houston Texans. At the time, this was the 2nd highest contract in the NFL, just behind Aaron Rodgers. And although Deshaun Watson had reasons to be excited to be with the Texans once again, he wasn't as excited because a month and a half prior, the Houston Texans traded DeAndre Hopkins to the Arizona Cardinals for David Johnson, one of the most lopsided trades in NFL history. You'd expect Deshaun Watson to regress at this point, but little did we know he would have his best season to date, throwing for over 4,800 passing yards, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and getting sacked 49 times, but also adding 444 rushing yards. But alas, it didn't really matter, as JJ Watt would even famously say that the Texans wasted one of Deshaun Watson's best years.
I'm sorry. We wasted one of your years. I'm sorry.
Following this, Deshaun Watson would demand a trade and quickly became the hottest trade candidate in the NFL until something much more darker would occur. According to Tony Busby, Deshaun Watson had over 20 allegations of SA brought forth against him, and this would happen very shortly after his trade demand. As a result of the cases that were brought forth against Deshaun Watson, he didn't play in the 2021 NFL season at all. But once he was cleared of any criminal charges, and these allegations became civil lawsuits, meaning that there was no chance that he'd go to jail, teams were once again interested in potentially trading for him. And this is where things get really weird. If you want this from the Browns perspective, we just made a video on the history of Cleveland Browns quarterbacks, but the short version of this is, for some reason, the Cleveland Browns just didn't believe in Baker Mayfield as their future under center. This is because Baker had one of his worst seasons for them after attempting to play through a torn labrum in his final season with Cleveland. On top of this, Odell Beckham Jr.'s dad called out Baker Mayfield for not finding Odell Beckham Jr. whenever he was wide open, and this happened multiple times throughout the season. So the Cleveland Browns approached Deshaun Watson about the opportunity to play for them, and originally Deshaun Watson said no. And it wasn't until Cleveland came forth with an opportunity that Deshaun Watson couldn't refuse that he finally relented and agreed to sign an extension with the Cleveland Browns. So Cleveland traded a 2022 first and fourth round pick, a 2023 first and third round pick, and a 2024 first and fourth round pick to the Houston Texans in return for Deshaun Watson. On top of this, Deshaun Watson was given the most unprecedented contract in NFL history, a 5-year, $230 million fully guaranteed contract. Watson was expected to be the missing piece. Kevin Stefanski had already proven himself as a head coach. When Baker Mayfield was fully healthy, this team was capable of not only making it to the playoffs and beating their division rival Pittsburgh Steelers, but they nearly were able to beat the Kansas City Chiefs in the next round of the playoffs as well. So the philosophy was, if Deshaun Watson could turn back the clock to the version of himself he was in 2020, supported with a strong defense, a fairly strong wide receiver core, and a good rushing attack, then the Cleveland Browns would be unstoppable and would finally bring home the Lombardi. At the same time, fans absolutely hated this because the Cleveland Browns gave up so much for Deshaun Watson and overpaid for his services. It was a clear act of desperation, and one that a lot of fans thought was completely unnecessary for an individual that they just didn't want to get behind given what he was dealing with off of the field. But the Browns thought if Deshaun Watson would simply play well and play like he did in the 2020 NFL season, fans wouldn't really care. But it was immediately an uphill battle. Deshaun Watson would be suspended for the first 11 games of the 2022 NFL season, and when he came back, he looked nothing like his former self, completing 58% of his passes, throwing 7 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. Fans just thought Deshaun Watson was rusty, but alas, this would continue on to the next year. Deshaun Watson had a 61% completion percentage, threw 7 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, and had literally half the QBR that he had in his rookie season before going down with a shoulder injury. So year 3 was supposed to be a huge make or break season, and year 3 was even worse for Deshaun Watson. He was the worst quarterback in the NFL for the 2024 season, and we went into detail about this in our previous video. But with Deshaun Watson under center, the Browns offense was averaging a minus 1.3 expected points added per drive, the lowest average for any Browns offense in weeks 1 through 6 since at least 2000. It's also the worst Browns offense this millennium by success rate and yards per play. play, and Deshaun Watson also ranks last in EPA per dropback and success rate among any Browns quarterback, with 120 plus dropbacks in weeks 1 through 6 since at least 2000. Deshaun Watson's QBR was a 21.7 for the 2024 season, which was less than half of the worst season that he had with the Houston Texans, and literally half of his QBR for the 2023 season with the Browns. If you take a look at his EPA per dropback since 2000, Deshaun Watson is mentioned among names like Kyle Bowler, David Carr, Jay Fielder, Will Levis, Joey Harrington, Josh Rosen, and Jamarcus Russell. If you take a look at his success rate on dropbacks since 2000, he's once again mentioned among names like Mark Bulger, Achilles Smith, Blaine Gabbert, and Jamarcus Russell. And this is before we get to the worst part of all. Not only was Deshaun Watson without a doubt the worst quarterback for the Cleveland Browns this past season, not only was he so bad that Amari Cooper was rumored to want a trade out of Cleveland because of this, but the best part of all, Deshaun Watson tore his Achilles tendon. And nothing explains how fans feel about Deshaun Watson more than the reaction that this garnered. So according to Ian Rappaport, Deshaun Watson, who was carted off, is feared to have suffered a torn Achilles injury, a likely season-ending injury for Watson, and unfortunately exactly as it appeared on the field. We've seen situations like this before, and it's truly gut-wrenching because players are crying on the field as they're being carted off, and it's not a pretty sight at all seeing someone in this amount of pain. I mean, it kind of reminds me of when Dak Prescott broke his leg. You can't do anything but feel empathy for that individual. But given everything that has gone on with Deshaun Watson, given the fact that he's getting paid fully guaranteed money, and given the fact that some fans thought that he got away with some truly horrific stuff that were allegations against him, which we're not claiming on this channel that he did it, but the allegations are pretty insane. As a result of this, fans were cheering that Deshaun Watson tore his Achilles. I mean, look at this. I have to admit, some of the comments about this are pretty funny. Like, it's super tough to see Deshaun Watson's Achilles tendon buckle under the weight of more than 24 sexual assault allegations. My friend Jaguar Gator replied to this Ian Rappaport tweet saying, "Unfortunately, I think we have very different definitions of that word." Someone even said karma is undefeated. Billy Tinkle said, "Don't let him go to a massage parlor for his recovery process." But the most telling part about this tweet is what Blitz Sports Media said. This might have been his last play with the team, and we're gonna get to that in just a sec. Following the game, Jameis Winston called out the fact that fans were cheering for Deshaun Watson's injury.
I was taught to love no matter the circumstances, especially for people who do right by you. I'm grateful that I had a chance to serve Deshaun, but I am very upset with the reaction. Regardless of your perception, he committed every single day to be the best that he can be. Well, I know the standard, but the way I was raised, I will never pull on a man when he's down, but I will be the person to lift him up, because all of us have circumstances, conditions, and facts that we face every single day. And I pride myself in being a man that wants the best out of everybody. What I want for myself, I want for everyone. And I do not want the treatment that Deshaun Watson has received from these passionate fans. So when I first got here, I knew these were some amazing fans, but Deshaun was treated badly.
And Myles Garrett also had this to say.
Whether it's an opponent that goes down or one of our own, we don't boo guys that are injured on the field, especially when the card comes out. We should be ashamed of ourselves to boo anyone. Man, it's not perfect. None of us are expected to be perfect, but we need to do better. We need to do better on the football field, and we need to do better as fans for a man who's doing the best he can. We have to be better.
But what about Deshaun Watson's future? What is that going to look like now that he's out with an Achilles tear? Again, Deshaun Watson's contract is unprecedented, and I've even accused him multiple times of just not caring about the game of football anymore, primarily because he's gonna get paid no matter what. If you take a look at Deshaun Watson's contract, he is under contract with the Cleveland Browns until the conclusion of the 2026 season. And while originally I joked that maybe Deshaun Watson was gonna find better luck with another team once he left the Cleveland Browns, I really don't know how I feel about his chances of success moving forward, because he was terrible with an intact Achilles. So what makes you think he's going to be back once he returns from a torn Achilles? So Mike Florio actually gives us an insight as to what the Browns' options are with Deshaun Watson. And it starts with him saying, entering today's game, the Browns had a short-term and long-term problem arising from the Deshaun Watson contract. If, as it appears, Deshaun Watson has suffered a season-ending non-contact Achilles tear. And he says that the short-term problem as a result of this is solved, but the long-term problem remains. And here's what fans don't realize. If you remember, week after week, Kevin Stefanski was constantly asked who was going to be their quarterback under center, and he really had no choice but to say Deshaun Watson each and every week, because the Browns are paying him fully guaranteed money until the end of the 2026 season. You can't bench a player that is getting paid the amount of money that Deshaun Watson is. He gets that money no matter what. You aren't gonna leave him on your bench no matter how badly he's playing. Deshaun Watson had the ultimate leverage against the Cleveland Browns. They had no choice but to continue playing him in hopes that he will be able to turn it around. But the long-term problem remains. The Browns owe Watson $46 million in 2025 and $46 million in 2026. Every penny is fully guaranteed. That's $92 million. And it gets even worse. The Cleveland Browns restructured Deshaun Watson's contract in the past, meaning they pushed off his cap hit to future years. So now his cap number for 2025 is $73 million, and it's the same for 2026. There's another $26 million that would hit the cap if he's released or traded. So here are the Browns' options. One is they could keep him on the roster and let him compete to be the starter next year. Two is they could keep him on the roster and not play him, but they'll still be paying him $46 million either way. Three is they could cut him, but they'd still have to pay him, and the cap consequences would be insane. A pre-June 1st release would be a $173 million cap hit, and a post-June 1st release would mean $73 million in 2025 and $100 million in 2026. A trade would be highly unlikely unless the Browns add significant draft picks to the $92 million that another team would be inheriting. Watson could eat some of his salary to make a trade happen, but why would he? This is his last big contract. No one's gonna pay him this amount ever again. And since this injury happened in the middle of this season, there's no chance he'll even be 100% by week 1 of the 2025 season. And even if he is, he's only gonna be worse than this year when he was the worst quarterback in Browns history, and that's saying something. That's why I feel so conflicted about Deshaun Watson. At one point, he was magical to watch on the field. He was like a Houdini in the pocket, scrambling and creating plays on the run. He had a cannon of an arm, and he was absolutely surgical in dissecting opposing defenses. Then these allegations were brought forth against him, and as fans like to joke, the prime Deshaun Watson died on the massage table. And as a fan of his game, it's really sad to see, but obviously, given what's happened to him off the field, a lot of people don't feel much empathy for him. At the end of the day, no matter how you feel about the guy, the man made nearly $300 million just to play football, and his biggest contract came after playing 18 games for the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns are in a very tough situation moving forward after they just cast aside Baker Mayfield to trade for a player that had these horrific allegations brought forth against them. And currently, Baker Mayfield is doing just fine with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Meanwhile, not only did the Browns give up 3 first-round picks, 2 fourth-round picks, and a third-round pick to trade for Deshaun Watson before signing him to the biggest contract in NFL history, but now they'd probably have to bundle draft picks in order to move on from this contract. There's an alternate universe where the Cleveland Browns kept Baker Mayfield, signed him to the contract that the Buccaneers signed him to, which isn't even in the top 15 of highest paid QB contracts, reloaded in free agency to support their defense, and used those draft picks to draft well to support Baker Mayfield and Kevin Stefanski and potentially win a Super Bowl. But unfortunately, in this reality, the Cleveland Browns screwed it up once again, destroying quite possibly their greatest chance at a competitive football team for years to come. And at the end of the day, no one feels bad for them. We have a much more in-depth history on what happened to the Cleveland Browns and their quarterbacks. I'll leave a link to that in the end screen, and I'll meet you guys there. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.
Lucas.